Crowd noise.
You need to put that artificial stuff that you stadiums now. Not a lot of people are there.
Yeah, I do. You're right. Just spice up this choral methods thing a little.
Get the applause by the
All right. They heard that, I think. I think there's some people who are troubled. Okay. Good morning. I'm afraid there's going to be a few people that are going to take advantage of this. I should have been a little more clear. If you can be here, be here. There we go. That's the cricket option. All right, there we are, there we are, there we are. Yep, that's what. All these people were going to get huge demerits. Especially Michaela. Oh, she's here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Well, there you go. Okay.
Well, my hope is we have the majority of people here today. So if you're listening, which I know most of the class is, some of the things that I'm going to cover today are not going to, you have to be able to see, but we can play catch up in various ways about that. Obviously, we're going to have to retract and go directly from choral warm-up to some other things that I'd like to get into right away for obvious reasons. I think we've spent enough time on that. I would have loved to have had more practical applications, but there's going to be a way that I can segue that into some of the rehearsal techniques that we do. And I'm not going to be able to be sort of responsive to questions from the video peanut gallery so much today, just because I got a lot of stuff to get through. But by Thursday, I'd like to know from all of you that are watching, and I can get a little hands up here. I know that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you are in Quarta, so that's not an issue. But for you two, Marcus and Brandon, are you available at 1:30? Not every day, but one time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday? Yeah, so the point is the way that I'm thinking of getting to the practical application is getting you into the concert choir and having you warm up the choir. I mean, that's going to be a much more effective way anyway than even the class, just because it is a choir, they're used to the whole process, and so I think that will be a more beneficial uh, experience for you. So those of you that are online, that's what I'm going to want to know from each of you by Thursday's class is if you are going to be available. And what that would mean would be the top of the hour, like right at 1:30 on either Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. And it would only have to be once in order to take 10 minutes and do a warm-up experience. Um, and it doesn't have to be, as I said, each of those days, just one of those days sometime in the next month and a half. So we'll get to that together, when everybody's here. And so the warm up, ideally, that was the way that we are going to get our 12 instrument singing, that we're going to address group vocal techniques. There are even resources out there in print and online titled group vocal techniques, which is basically what you're doing. You're teaching voice to a large group of people. And the idea is to transition from whatever activities middle school, high school folks have been in to focus, to get them to sing, to work on the corporate and the individual so that individuals can experience some growth, but also to establish your vocal concepts that you're going to build on for the whole year and then beyond. The part that I'd like to segue into later, not right now, but that is there is an aspect of warm-up activities that may have nothing to do with voice. That we kind of touched on that when I asked you to do what I do, and we focused on just doing activities to get people's attention, to get them to concentrate and to focus. That's one element of activities that have very little to do with the vocal, but they have to do with warming up the mind, warming up the focus. Another group of things are literacy skills. So incorporating maybe up on the screen or whatever technology you have in your classroom, you have different lines with different rhythmic structures in different meters. So let's say you're working on 4/4, you might have four different lines of, let's say, four measures apiece that have everything from or some set rhythmic patterns, and then let's say you have A, B, C, D. You might segue out of the performance. You might start the class that way with a visual, help aid that everybody goes up and they look up there and you say, okay, everybody, let's clap rhythm A. And then we have one and two, teacher instructs and models what's the pulse and what is the notation that precedes the pulse. So let's say it's 4/4, we do some sort of activity and everybody claps the first line, maybe everybody claps the second line, maybe everybody, there's lots of ways to do it. Sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses, you assign one line to each of those people, each of the sections, and they do it at the same time. And that's why you have a symmetrical 4-bar phrase of rhythms. Maybe then you take it a step further and you say, okay, sopranos on A, altos on B, tenors on C, basses on D, and then you go in order to the next one. So everybody has a 16-bar pattern, but they're always doing the next one together as a unit. So that's one thing. You could do the same thing with visual aids, one way or another. Sight reading, intervallic drills, combining the two so that we have notation and rhythmic skills in a graded vocal methods. What do I mean by graded vocal? I mean easy to harvest. So that you're not starting with Schoenberg, atonal line or something, but you're starting with just, maybe by step, by thirds, and that's the interval that you're concentrating on that day. Then you graduate to other intervallic. So there's lots of elements in the first part of rehearsal that we didn't get to. And we will come around back to that. And that's going to be part of the methodology that you might use to teach your students skills, to make them literate, so that they get used to reading maybe a couple of different clefs at least, so that all of the people in your choir can read both treble and bass clef. And there may even be very, getting into some other things. But so where does all this lead us? And my goal today is to try to get us back to both the big picture and move on to something in the small picture, because we've sort of lost track, I think, of the big picture. Where do choral warm-ups, where do the vocal warm-ups fit in the whole program? So, vocal pedagogy, yeah, we want to know something about the voice. How do we use that then going forward? The next thing that I'd like to talk about, the next activity, is a vocal audition, is the choir audition. And that is, how do you get a big group of students and figure out lots of things? So what are you figuring out? You're figuring out, obviously, what's their voice part? And what are the potential places that they could sing in the choir without damaging their voice? So just because you have 5 boys and 67 girls doesn't mean you're going to make 4 of those boys basses and 3 of those boys tenors, because they may not have the range to do that. Likewise, for the gals, you may have, I'll make it more practical, 30, around 30 girls, and it's not going to be 15 and 15. It's probably going to be it's probably going to be a lot easier for many of those young women to sing in the middle. And the same thing with the boys. So this is how we assess that. And it's a snapshot. It's a way that you might spend up to 8 or 10 minutes with each student, and that's no time at all. I mean, think about whatever you instrument. Imagine having a violinist or a trombonist or a clarinetist or a pianist come up in front of you, and you get 8 minutes with them. And so what are you going to do in that 8 minutes to assess their skill level, to assess their literacy? Can they read? Do they read rhythms? Do they read melodic line? Do they read intervallically? Because those are 2 different things, aren't they? Melodic, can they assess shapes? And do they have an ability to, okay, that goes up and that goes down. That sounds funny for us to say, but it's a big deal. Because lots of your beginning singers are not going to even put those 2 things together if they have no previous experience. They're not going to see an ascending interval and immediately go, oh, oh, and sing it. They may even do some sort of relative, pitch. So, and then there's intervallic, which is much more specific, right? So they've had some training probably, and 9.9 times out of 10 on the middle school and high school level, if they have reading ability at that age, they've got some instrumental background. That's just the way it is. And they have not probably learned that just on their own. I was born with, reading, whatever. So, um, so you can monitor the individual's growth as well. So when I was teaching public school, I did an audition twice a year. And that's not a great amount. But the reason that I did that was because the voices are constantly in flux, and you can have a week or two, and boys' voices drop, or women completely change where they're singing. So that was my attempt, and I've never taught in a system that had quarters. I've never taught in a system that had trimesters. In the old days, it was almost always semesters, and so and then that carried that on when I came into the university level. So I always had the semester experience. And so it just made sense because of the way the year was divided for me to do that. Now in trimesters, which is a big thing now, or in a lot of places, um, you might have 3 or 4 segments of time where your entire roster changes. So you might have first trimester, you've got concert choir. Second trimester, you've got the swing group or the jazz group, and it's a completely different group of kids. Or they may hopscotch one and say, okay, I've got girls group first and third trimester. So you're confronted with a lot less dependable sort of personnel group than what I'm describing in the semester situation. So, and then um, there's managing the choral instrument. So you're worried about the individual, right? Keeping track long term. And how do I manage the various pieces to this puzzle in my group? whatever group I have. So, like if we have that 3 guys and 20 girls, that's one way. You might be in a district where a lot more boys participate than in other places. You might have up to 30 to 35% of your group potentially male. Because that's a good percentage. It's very rare anywhere in the country that's 50-50. But it is in some places, and that's not what we're going to talk about. We're not going to spend too much time on having a perfect situation. So, what is the way that one goes about doing that? There's that discussion. How do we organize an audition? Because there's the organization of the event, right? How much time am I going to need? Let's say we need 8 minutes per student. That's what I usually like to have, but that's my system, and there are lots of different philosophies. There's some teachers that do a lot more time, and there's some teachers that have them sing a scale or something like that, and they do it in 3 or 4 minutes. So numbers are going to play a big part of your decision making. Um, what kind of group you have is going to make a big series of choices for you. If you've got an outside group that, let's say, like the Idaho State Children's Chorus, that is outside of the confines of a regular schedule, there's a different timing issue. There's a little more time, there's a little more flexibility. On the other hand, they're structured by, I would assume, parent schedules and other issues that confront some outside school activity. There is something called, as we all know, 0 hour, and lots of choral and band and other groups are thrust into the 0 hour time because that's when nothing else is happening. And to escape the scheduling conflicts with everything else that's going on in the school, oftentimes it's way before the rest of the classes begin, or it's after school when other things, and then there's the athletic and drama and theater. So your scheduling is the first thing you consider, and how many students you need to hear, how much time do you have. So there are other situations. What's your building like? So do you have a rehearsal situation like kind of like what we have in this building, where you have a couple of different rehearsal rooms for each, band has one room, or an orchestra maybe, and the choir has its own designated room? Great. Do you have at least 1 or 2 practice rooms in your facility? Great. Because then there's a lot more options. Then we can start talking about using school time to accomplish some of these things, because you can also get some help team teaching with other faculty or something. I did this actually both for and with one of the schools that I taught with the band room. And we were right across our office, we shared offices in a central area. It was like, instead of Orange Hall, here we have a suite of offices. And so our rooms were on opposite sides, we had windows, we could look at either side. And so there were some things that I set up, and there were some things that he set up for me to monitor the students in his class, or him monitor my students, so that I could take those individuals and deal with them for maybe 3 or 4 days in a row in a particular class. That's a luxurious situation, because we didn't have always concurrent scheduling. We didn't always have rehearsals at the same time. So, that those are all the other things that have to be considered and worked out. So let's say all that stuff has been handled, and we've got the scheduling, we know how much time we have, and we know when we're going to do it, and what the student populations are going to be dealing with. We have to record this information. We need to have records that are both short and long term, because you're assuming on the public school level that you're going to retain these kids. And you hope for more than one trimester. You would like to build your program. You would like to have them in there as freshmen all the way through seniors and realize the glory of your teaching, and they sing better at the end than they do when they come. That their skills are better, which is the reason why maybe we have the ability to have advanced groups. Um, and then also, you want your instrument to be healthy. You want them to be able to sing for a long time. Ease of singing equals probability of staying in the program. If those kids do not sing well or have pain when they sing, they will not enjoy the experience. And so it helps us for our program to, to allow the students to be able to participate as well as they can. And the deal is, let's hook them. Let's hook them into the experience. And part of that is, trying to put them in a part, place them in a section in which they can realize on their own, hey, I'm singing better. This is easier this week. This is, I really like the way I sing. And then you finally get to the point where you can talk about things like, wow, isn't that a beautiful piece? Isn't that chord amazing? And we tune that chord, because if they're dealing with just being able to sing it, they're not even reachable in that area, again, the aesthetics. So this is a really big deal in terms of managing your choral program. So there are so many programs out there today that are, data storage programs, and I'm going to take you through just the archaic, so that you get a hands-on. I acknowledge that any number of things, you could sit at a piano with a laptop and record the same information. You could have any series of programs now that just require a code for the student to sign in. I acknowledge that there is a lot of technology that could shorten the work process and that can help you to manage all this information. But it doesn't change the kind of information that you have to, that you need to collect. So how you store that is, there's a myriad of ways to do it. The article, my hands are thoroughly washed several times when I made this. And this is what our friends at home can't get today. Is certified by the Surgeon General. This is not what it says it is on the top. Rehearsal planning and technique. This comes from another methods book that auditions are in the rehearsal planning and technique section. So the introduction and the next page discusses how to audition for a class. And it's interesting. There's five of you sitting in here now that how do we do this right now? Because you've been through it so many times. And all of the, for example, the top, it discusses the audition process and why, what we've already talked about. And then you see some basic exercises. How would you sing? Have them sing. Here's some ideas. And they're all things that you vocalists have done since you were behind to impress others. And then, ideas of if you use hand, hand filled out kinds of cards or something that the student fills out by hand, that's how they do it. The same thing can be done online. You could put your forms online, have the student wait and, fill those out, and then you just see them on your own laptop or however. There's many school districts that have, the equivalent of an iPad that students have access to and they can use on a regular basis. So the information that you want to collect, most importantly, we're going to want to know their range. We're going to want to know what is the highest note and what is the lowest note they can sing. That does not mean tessitura, does it? Tessitura is probably the most important aspect of evaluation for any voice type. And that is what? The majority of the time, where that voice sings. So So tessituras can be very different in any piece of music that we select to teach. A tenor can sing right up around high F sharp, F sharp 4. Uh, or a tenor might sing right around middle C, C4 most of the time. And that is a completely different experience because it's right on their break at one point, and the other time it's kind of in the mid-low range. And so the stress on the voice is very different. So tessitura just really literally means where the voice lies. And in our usage, we're going to say where it lies most of the time in a piece of music. So what goes together with this? And now the world is going to start to make sense. Or at least the choral music method world. This form that I'm passing out now, and those of you watching along at home with popcorn and eggs and whatever you're eating, I'm passing out a music evaluation sheet that is not going to be the one that you use. Great teaching. But it is going to have all of the information because you're going to be using a fillable PDF that will be configured a little bit differently, but it will ask for the same information. And because I know most of you keep a couple of copies of this in your hip flask, whenever you know that you're taking one of my classes, it's in my top 40. And now fear is going through the hearts of all conductors. Again, the dreaded American Beautiful. So, all of the things that we're talking about in your vocal assessment that you're going to use to evaluate individual singers in audition is precisely what we're going to do to evaluate choral literature. So the model that we'll do before you leave here today is American Beautiful, so that we go through and answer the questions on this forum, so that then you can go forth and do the same thing in that booklet that I gave you. So back to the choral audition then. So all of the sheets that the author makes reference to on page 37 there, some sort of recording, whether it's in a program, on your laptop, or whatever, you are assessing this information and you're writing it down. And it's based on that semester, quarter, trimester that you're hearing them. And that's what I mean by a snapshot. For any of you sitting in this room, your voices are not settled yet. Meaning that the vocal instrument, the vocal folds, and the maturation, when it gets mature muscularly, all of the structures of the voice are some of those structures that are latest in development, latest in settling for any human being. And it just depends on the individual body, depends on the individual person. To some degree, gender, although that's less of an issue. But it's widely believed that most human beings' vocal development does not really stop until the mid-30s, early to mid-30s. So none of you are in that boat yet. And so your voices are still in flux. So I still maintain yearly records, even here at the university level. And as many of you know, you could be, because I heard you have all gone through some thought changes. I mean, you all are in flux since you started as fresh women, right? I mean, some of you are in choir, you're singing completely different parts than you were when you came here. Or you have moved around, or you could sing completely different parts, like Ryan Bria. You could sing a lot higher. We we can have you in the Spanish section. She's like, I'm sick of alcohol.
I'm not.
But the point is that that doesn't stop when you get out of the public school level. So the amount of time between auditions needs to be much shorter, however, in younger kids. Because it could be weeks, days, that some of those people go through a voice change. So in our evaluation, the discussion between range and tessitura are ways that we evaluate both voices and the music for those voices. So when you're picking out literature, you're not going to use a completely different standard than the way you're evaluating those voices, right? You're going to use the same thing because it's those voices that have to sing that music. So sometimes there's a disconnect, you know, and I don't mean here. I just mean people don't realize. Okay, I'm going to go out and I've got such great music ideas because he sang some incredible Brahms when I was in college. You know, and so you trot that out to your high school kids, and they're like, "No way!" On many levels, yes.
So I assume that choral music is rated the same way as like band or orchestra, right? Like level or like grade one or level one, two, three, four.
Yeah, it's similar, but the nomenclature, the labeling is different. It's yeah, and we'll talk about that too, because when you go into like the JW Pepper website or you go into sheetmusicplus.com and you look at some of the octavos, you'll see some of those grading notes at the bottom or whatever. But we'll talk about how they define those for vocal music. Okay, so if you look on page 39, 40, they have the difference between vocalises and psyche. So that's the other thing you want to know, right? Besides how high, how low, where their voice sounds comfortable, what's the level of the sight reading ability? It can be from 0 to off the charts. So there have even on the college level, I have many times written no skills, and that's not a knock, it's just a fact. They don't have any skills. They've never learned them. Maybe they have a great ear. I've had some students that, on the basis of their voice, they sang so beautifully that I put them in my top choir, even at the risk of not having such, because there were other strong readers, so that there was a give and take. But sorry, I'm torn between two sounds. So, sight reading is something that you want to know about, rhythmic and melodic, or intervallic, because they tell you two completely different things. You all know that you can have somebody who reads songs off any rhythm. Maybe they're a pure percussionist, and they can play, tap, taw, anything, but they don't know the difference between a minor third and a perfect field goal. They just don't know really what they are. And then the reverse is true. You can have people that read really well intervallically and cannot keep time, or cannot read subdivisions, cannot read syncopations at all. And that is a pretty common vocal issue, right? If there's a vocal background and almost no instrumental background, syncopation is often very weak. Subdivisions are often weak. So it's the assessment in a short amount of time of all of those things. That's what we want. And then finally, not finally, but through it all, somebody walks into your office or your schoolroom or your practice room, and they walk in and they know that they're being assessed, right? Everything from that to, hey, how you doing? sing for me. That's when it comes out. So the problem is that there's a human being in there who is dealing with a lot of anxiety about the whole process. And unless they've had, fairly significant experience, they're going to be nervous. All of us are nervous. I was nervous all the way through graduate school doing auditions. It's never changed. It never changed. It got a little better because I knew I could do those things, but you still have somebody or a group of people evaluating you. There's just nothing more, more troublesome to a lot of us. So being able to relate to that in your students means that you consider, okay, in that 8 minutes, I'm going to try to contact them as a human being. I'm going to try to say hello. How are you doing today? Maybe get them to talk about something, even, a little, oh, what's your major if you're in university, or, hey, what class did you just come from? What are you involved with? Just something that gets them off uh, maybe the purpose that they're here. Asking things like, do you play an instrument? Oh, really? And sometimes, a lot of times, it's nope. Or they'll say, this is the great line. I play a little piano. And what they can mean is, I don't really play any piano, or I've taken lessons. I mean, it's everything and you'll say, well, can you play this? No, I'm having a bad day, or whatever. So it's interesting that sometimes piano is not the one that you want to find out about, but because everybody plays that, they play that at camp and stuff. Yeah.
So would you want to, if you're having a student accompanist for the year, do you want to ask them to play something for you on the piano?
Yeah, that's a totally different issue, but yes. I would definitely ask them to play something for me on the piano. But you can still find that out in the audition. Like if they come in, that could be question one is, what instrument do you play, and then the piano comes up. And then later on, you get into that. But all I mean is, in the short 8 minutes, I've learned to take that one with a pound of salt. Okay, great. Any other instruments? play the violin? Because oftentimes, those other instruments mean that they probably have some sort of right instruction, possibly. Piano, Aunt Tilly, I listened to her a couple of times, and she said, yeah, that's little C, and I found it. So all of the technical stuff and then the personal stuff. So we make them feel a little bit more comfortable. And then you decide, I'm going to organize the activities in an order where I prefer to do it something like this. I put the most stressful activities kind of up front, so that by the time they leave me, they feel some sense of accomplishment. So, in other words, if I do, well, let's vocalize it a little. The first thing they do, I don't want them to feel all torqued out. But let's vocalize a little, up and down, just to kind of get a good idea of your range. And then I choose to do rhythms, because I think rhythm is a little less for most people. Then, even if they say, yeah, I can't do that. Okay, I'm not going to force them to. But, so rhythm, and then real easy melodic. Like, let's say there's an exercise, and I do have one, in C major for a male voice. And it literally goes da 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 da. So it's just around the triad, the major triad, up and down, all around, and it's so safe because you can even kind of help them along with it. But that's how basic it might be, and then to more chromatic kinds of kind of exercises. So then, after your second favorite piece. So, and I just ask them to sing the melody. And why do I do that? Because every public school in the United States, it seems, because of NAFMA, ECDA, and the other musical organizations, use this piece as an assessment for a variety of things. So you either apply to all state, or a regional choir, or the choir, and because the choir directors have all been trained that way, they still use it to this day. It doesn't mean that all of them do all the time, but they have to at some point because, for example, in the state of Idaho, all state requires this to be sung if they want to be selected. So that's why. And there's a lot of reasons when we go through and we evaluate it. And I'm not going to do it now because not everybody's here. So, but when we go through and we evaluate this, we'll see, okay, the parts are limited, the ranges are limited. However, the melody has a couple of tricky intervals. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. So far, so good. For purple mountains, majesties. Oh, uh-oh. So those two intervallic places are where most people change keys 3 or 4 times. Really, younger people will change keys at those spots. So that what that assesses is two things. Maybe here, maybe not if they don't know the piece. And how do they handle the break in their voice? How do they get through that? Is it a break problem? Is that the reason that they're missing the interval? I just change it if I were a guy singing that piece in a certain key with a big break in my voice. I just change it, not because I couldn't hear, because I couldn't sing. And that still happens on this level occasionally. If you can assess, no, that's a real soprano, but you've got it in a moderate key, then you start thinking some other things. Uh-oh. You know,
Do you change the key according to?
I do. Yeah, I do. If I know the singers, I'll always voice it down for a bass or a low female voice. B flat is considered to be kind of a standard key for the bell-shaped curve. That's the other thing about this piece, is that the melody is considered to be pretty good for most voices in B flat major. And that's why most people just sing it, or most assessments are done in this key. But if you've got a real high soprano, you know that, or a high tenor, I'd probably put it in D flat or D, even that high for a high soprano. Because, well, there's a lot of big causes, but we have to talk about this a little more. Yeah.
This might be a stupid question, but are auditions typically accompanied or are they a cappella?
That is not stupid. They are typically a cappella. But the assistance that we give the singers is us sitting at the keyboard with them standing and singing for us. Meaning that, you know, back to what we were talking about with you giving that just proficient so that you can give them some reinforcement if they need it. Because I can just guarantee you that every other middle school kid it won't sing. I mean, you can say, okay, let's sing la la la, ready? And they'll just stand there. And then, oh, la la la. Then you play with them. Sing after 2 or 3 of these, they'll start to sing a little bit better. Then you sneak and not play the first one. So gradually take that away from them so that they're having to deal with it. But I just guarantee you, that's gonna be your life as an auditioner, is playing and pulling away the piano. I mean, that's a great question, because that's what we're gonna do in the auditions, is you're gonna be, now that you bring it up, you, sir, are going to be sitting at the keyboard. So, what I'm trying to do here is tie two things together. Tie the audition process together with what we're going to evaluate on the choral music that you're going to select. And I mean this long term, so that you are always thinking, okay, who are the real students I have in my group? Not some theoretic, because literature is going to be one of the most important things you do. And it doesn't matter if you're a band teacher, orchestra teacher, or choir. Literature goes to your group. And if you're sticking music in front of them that's either way too easy or way too hard, that's where you need the experience. That's where, okay, over time, you'll realize, yeah, I tried to do March in E flat with that group one year. Kind of blew the flutes out of the water. Or I tried to do, this wonderful Haydn piece with my girls, and they couldn't sing those runs at all. Or whatever. So the two are connected, and I don't want to separate them. So we're going to be doing a little bit more connection as we go down, so that I'm covering more things with you. I hope to get a little bit into rehearsal technique today, or to bridge the topic. And when we have more folks, any of you who are listening at home that end up not coming to class in person on Thursday, I will be using the textbook on that day, so even if you're not here, you can still follow along that way. The benefits to being here in class are going to be, just whatever corporate activities that we do, and using the resources that I have in class for you. So before I end this session, we're almost out of time, is I'm going to continue along these lines on Thursday, and then I've got also a piece, besides us evaluating America the Beautiful on the form that I just gave you. I'm going to give you the first piece that we'll look at as music directors for a choir. And we'll go through that same process so that we're already starting to see, okay, how do the choral evaluation sheets work for our preparation for rehearsal? And all of that stuff, so that we're just kind of thinking more holistically. Finally, your syllabus is pretty much worthless at this point. And so I know people are concerned. Kent, Pat, Michaela, I think she tried to keep the anxiety out of her when she said, do you have another copy of this one? And those of you that were in my COVID choral conducting class know that a lot of changes were made as we went. And that's the same way this is going to be. I think I was pretty fair in the grading of that class. And it's going to be fair here. You're not going to be assessed on activities that you don't have an applied mechanism for me to give you a grade. Some of the things that we do may turn into being competency things. And what that means, you're going to go through it. You're going to do it. And that's going to be it. Like we did the warm-up. Some of you did 2 sessions, some of you didn't. Everybody watched other people do it. I just can't change the situation. And one of the things that we're at the mercy of is when there is a COVID situation, I can't take the risk of having class. And if as I did for last Thursday, I had a series of activities planned like we're doing today, that there was no way I could transfer those into a visual. So sometimes it just also depends on how close we are to a breakout, or how close, when a situation arises, and I had no choice other than say, hey, we're not have class today, because number one, I didn't want everybody together in the same room, and number two, what I had didn't transfer well into the video realm. So that's my problem. But I have to acknowledge that with you. And I'm gonna do my best to get you information that is applicable in the classroom. But as far as the assessment, I mean, and the kinds of activities that this class normally, and number one, we have 16 people, which is the largest class I've ever had. Number two, if we lose 2 or 3 classes in the interim of any, then it's impossible. I just can't make it up. So I have to admit to you that it's somewhat watered down. This class is somewhat watered down from the usual way that it's presented. And I'm not going to pretend that it's not. But I'm also going to do my best to give you information that should be useful. The difference is going to be that in many cases, you will probably have to test it out in the field. You will probably have to go, okay, I'm going to extrapolate from this, and I'm going to have a little less practical experience than maybe I would have in a previous semester. But that's the semester we're in, and we'll do our best. Assessment of your grade, while it's important to me, I'm not going to penalize any of you for, so the inflation happens there, right? I mean, if you don't have maybe your A doesn't mean the same thing that it would have in 2019, or in terms of what you had to do. But I'm more concerned about information and content. Kill me, but that's the way it'll be. So your syllabus is just gonna, in fact, I will rewrite it in such a way that reflects what I'm describing. But what you have, throw away. Bye-bye. Yes.
This is like a what if question.
Yep.
What if you have a student, because I've encountered this in high school before. You can play the pitch that you're trying to get from them, and they can hear it, but they can't phonate it back to you. Like, there's just a disconnect between what they're
Do you know that I had that problem when I was going through school? And I still occasionally have it. Like, I'll hear it clear as a bell inside my head, but there is a certain dysphonia. I had it pretty badly when I was in high school. And your brain functions so quickly that your mechanism can't keep up with it. And there's a disconnect. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, back when, bye, hello, you can stay. I just didn't want you to think you had to.
Yeah, I guess.
I know that she really did want to do choir, and she was really invested in trying, but she just couldn't.
Yeah.
Couldn't match what was going on.
Well, there are other ways for you to assess that, I mean, you can ask her to identify it differently than through the singing voice. And then there's also the issue of, on a different issue, we'll talk about this for the audition, but now this is a different situation than the friend you're describing, but there are some people who you think, I think they've got an ear problem. So what you do is you give them random pitches to repeat. Bum, bum, bum. And then sometimes they can do it. And you go, okay. There were other issues at play. Nerves. Somebody sees a written line and they just freak out because they have to reproduce it. But as soon as they go visceral, as soon as they go native on hearing it, they can repeat the pitches.
Okay.
So there's lots of different kinds of assessments that way.
Is this due on Thursday?
No. We're going to go through it together. I'll send out a message that's very clear about that because it. I should have included a sentence today on this that said, if you have to be away from class, here's the Zoom invitation.
Dr. Class had a similar problem last semester with his program.
Oh.
Was that class?
Zoom off with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think I won't. I think I'll just. I'm gonna do it because I want to have a recording of the classes for everybody to go back to if they want. But I'll just say my expectations is that unless you're ill, you're in class. So that's what I should have said. but I will. Remember, we're at the, in Jensen today. Yay. Mm-hmm.
For studio, I'm thinking of singing Studio de la Bamba. Is that good?
Yes! See.
See. Cool. Oh, and then I've checked with my women, and all of my women can meet during my lesson time.
Oh,
Did you want that to happen?
this week?
Or next week? 9 on Thursday. Right after this class.
And your jury's next week, right?
Yeah, Friday.
I think it might be good to do it this week.
Okay?
Don't you?
Yes, I do.
But where will we meet? We have to find a room bigger than my office.
Yes.
We'll have to see if there's, well, it's just, we'll have to go through Liz, but it's so hit and miss. Because even if the schedule says open, there's every other faculty is. Our Thursday, well, 9's open. How about, would you mind doing check with Liz? And then if I need to follow up, I will. Just let me know and I'll confirm that maybe we can either get this room at 9 or Goranson Hall. Goranson Hall would be the best. But that's even more signed out than this.
I'll ask.
It's funny because that's the only hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays that's available for this room. Other than choir, but they're.
Cool. I'll go ask her now.
Okay.
Awesome.
See ya.
Thanks,